museums with more than just their wallets and their eyes and possibly their pens to destroy things. I believe they come in with a lot of ideas and creative abilities to contribute, and that's what I fundamentally am interested in. I live in Santa Cruz, another beautiful Santa place in California, up in the woods there, and I'm a consultant, so I work with a bunch of different museums focusing on visitor participation, and I just published this book called The Participatory Museum, again focusing on ways that visitors can collaborate with, contribute to, be involved in museums. And my philosophy is not quite get out of the way, it's more invite people and be a good host. I feel like when it comes to visitor participation, we often think, well, it's giving the museum over to visitors, or it's getting out of the way for them. And I tend to feel like, no, this is a different kind of scaffolded experience where we create opportunities for people to contribute in ways that are meaningful for them, but also for the institution. And so I guess where I wanted to come from in terms of telling you where I'm at is to give you a little bit about how I think about museums. I think that traditionally, and by traditionally I mean probably 90s-ish, we think about museums in terms of being tourist destinations. We think of them in terms of this idea of being trusted sources of information, and that they're places for visitors to see and explore and learn things. And I think all of these are good, but fundamentally I'm much more interested in museums making some transitions. So the first of those is about this destination thing. I know that here there's a big tourism market, and I heard last night that about 70% of museum visitors are tourists. I really feel strongly, though, that for museums to be sustainable, we need to be looking not only at attracting those one-time visitors, but really being places for everyday use. And whether that means that it's a place that people are visiting frequently, the way you'd visit a library or visit a local coffee shop, or it's a place you're connecting to online again and again, I feel like museums become part of people's lives and they care about culture if they don't just think of it as something they do once a year. You know, I have a friend who's a librarian who says people use the library, but they visit museums. And I think that's a problem, and I'd like to see more people using museums the way they think of themselves using other places. The second thing is about this trusted source of information idea. I think this is something museums rightfully have been very proud of for many years, and surveys continue to show that museums are trusted sources, especially in a world of so many variable sources. But, you know, Stuart told this story earlier about being in the frame store and the question about the Oiseau and what does that mean. I don't think there's anybody who in that situation, and Stuart is probably, you know, the shining example of a person who would do this, who would say, I know, let's wait until 11 a.m. tomorrow when the museum's open, and let's go there and ask them, because they are the trusted source of information about art. That's not how we deal with information these days. And so I think that what's happening is people are moving from looking for authoritative sources to looking for what's available. And people are taking responsibility for themselves in arbitrating, is this good information, is it not? And so I think that instead of resting our value proposition on being sources of information, museums need to instead think about how can we be a host for a physical, social experience, because that is something that museums and physical spaces can be uniquely, is a place where you feel safe and you feel welcomed to interact with people and ideas that are different from those you come in with. And I think we have fewer and fewer of these kinds of places in our lives. You know, I have a friend who was working on a park project recently in Monterey, California, and they wanted to put some benches near an overlook to the ocean. And the state people said, why are these benches here? And they said, oh, it's just a place for people to hang out. And they said, oh, we don't want that kind of element here at the park. And, I mean, if you don't want that kind of element at a park, I think that we're often in this situation these days where we're eradicating these public spaces for people to convene and be social. And I think actually in particular, and I'll show a couple of examples of this, that museums are unique hosts for social experiences because the kinds of experiences people have when they interact with each other around objects and around challenging ideas, around art, brings up different kinds of conversations and social opportunities. The final of these is this idea of museums as places to learn, to see and explore. And I think that's important, and so what I'm about to show is really more of an and than an or. But I think that museums also need to be places for making and for sharing. There are lots of studies showing that people's participation in the arts from an attendance perspective is dropping as their participation from an individual perspective is growing. So for example, a 60-year-old man in the US is more likely to take up a new instrument than to attend an orchestral or a jazz concert. And I see again and again young people in particular doing things like getting together to knit. This is a Stitch and Bitch group in England, and they come together, they meet on the web, and they're getting together to knit. It drives me insane that this is happening in a coffee shop. Here is a hackerspace. This is basically a science center for adults. It's a place where people get together and do electronics. This is in a bar/art gallery. It drives me nuts that bars and coffee shops are the places that people who want to get together, to be creative, to learn together, to do art, are not places that are museums. And I really feel like it is time for us to take this business back and have people spend a little less time drinking coffee and a little more time feeling like the museum is the place for that. So this is my bias. So, yeah, all right. So, I'm an exhibit designer by training. I'm an engineer, and so I feel like you can have all the philosophical, political messages in the world, but if you don't figure out how to do this, then they're just really sort of some nice sentences. And so what I really spend my work time on is looking at how do you design places to do these kinds of things. So I just want to show you a couple of examples. The first is around this idea of everyday use. And I think that to do this, we have to focus less on making fabulous places for crowds and more on being like Cheers. This is a good group for this, actually. Cheers is the place where
everyone knows your name.
That's right. It's not the place where somebody rips your ticket and then lets you into this crowd. It's not a place where if you come back, they don't remember that you were there. But that is what museums are more like. And I think that when we think about things like visitor participation, people need to feel confident and welcomed to want to participate. And I think that when we expect that people are going to share their comments, share their stories in a generic and open feeling place, they don't feel welcomed. You know when you go to a party and somebody says, "Hey Joy, I'm so glad you're here, and you've got to talk to Virginia because you both love dogs," you feel like, "Oh yeah, I've got something to offer here." Whereas I think what often happens in museums is people come in and we just sort of say, "This is for you, take what you want, it's great that you're here," the end. Now I know that it's true that not every museum can be like Cheers. There's not that bartender who's always there. We have lots of different people who work at the front and things like that. But I'm interested then in technologies that help museums be a little more personal.